Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with co-host Mario Ramos Reyes and good friend John Breen. Today our special guest is Christopher Zehnder from Ohio. Let's begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful in the same Spirit. Help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Gentle auditors, we've managed to overcome some technical difficulties. I doubt if you'll be even aware of them. Our producer, the irrepressible, indefatigable Sebastian Mahfood, is producing this show from automobile, riding same automobile across the wide open spaces in Texas. We never know what to expect from him. But we have a very interesting guest here. Christopher Zehnder is an old friend, and once upon a time he lived in California, and he decided with his family to move to Ohio. And all along he's been very, very busy over the years. He's the general editor of the Catholic Textbook Project and the specific author of 5 of its volumes. Plus he writes novels. Plus he's an alumnus of Thomas Aquinas College, and he's an alumnus from back in the day when TAC, Thomas Aquinas College, was not world famous. And in addition, he has a master's in dogmatic theology from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, where, of course, our producer, Sebastian Mahfood, when he's grounded, is on the ground, and where our good friend John Breen recently graduated from. Now, we have a whole bunch of questions for Christopher, and we're going to start with some that are very general, move to some that are not quite so general, and then we're going to go for the jugular with a bunch of specific questions. To begin at the beginning, Christopher, you've been involved in liberal education for a long time now at various levels. What is it? What is liberal education?
Well, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the education that makes one a good Democrat or a member of the Green Party, what people call liberal at least. It's not education that is ordered to in Enlightenment politics. Liberal education is basically understanding education as that form of education which makes one a free man or a free woman, if you want me to be inclusive. What does it mean to be a free man or a free woman? Well, there's 2 ways we can express freedom, right? We talk about sometimes negative freedom, and we talk about positive freedom. Negative freedom is sometimes people describe as freedom from something, and that is basically the permission to do something. No one's going to hinder me doing what I want to do. Positive freedom is more the ability to do something. So the analogy I like to use often is if I'm a sound body, I can take a walk as long as nobody keeps me tied to a chair. That's negative freedom. Positive freedom is the actual ability to walk. In other words, if I lose the use of my legs through paralysis, I'm not free to walk because I don't have that ability. So what liberal education does, it makes us able to function on the intellectual level, on the moral level, fully as human beings. It's one of the aids to this. It's not, of course, the sole means by which this occurs. That requires grace and the like. But it actually equips us so that we can understand the world around us. And the point of the education is not that we might be good technicians, that we might be good at something practical. The point of the education is entirely unpractical in the sense that it's ordered to making us good men and women, fully integral men and women on the intellectual realm, and also on the cultural realm, and on the moral realm, in the moral realm as well.
But we need to get some critical views here. I just wonder, critical view number one is Mario, is that what liberal education really is? After all, you're an educator.
Good morning, friends. Well, I am basically, I would say yes, but I have a question. I don't know if I've understood quite well. You said that if we refer to negative freedom, is not precisely the core of liberal education, whereas positive freedom would be the basic tenets of liberal education. Is that right?
I would say what liberal education is ordered is a positive freedom. It's not ordered to the removal of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I understood well then. So then you are going to exclude a widespread view today among millennials, which is libertarianism. Is that an accurate assessment of that definition?
Well, I'm not sure at this point with liberal education it really addresses libertarianism itself insofar as it looked upon as a social and political viewpoint. I'm not quite sure what libertarian education would be would it be in the context of education. So maybe you could clarify that a bit for me.
Well, by libertarianism in the broad sense, I would define as that view that tried to prevent anyone, whether the state mainly or any other people, to infringe on my own freedom. Right. So I should be as free as I can, and I should be allowed to do what I want, and so get rid of any paternalism that may be around us, so that I can flourish as an individual and everyone else would do the same. Mm-hmm. I'm just coming back to South America, and that view is widespread. In other words, democracy generally is understood as giving that view, negative freedom view, as much room as possible. My point is that then is the case, which factually I think is the case, because this is how I can describe an experience. Do you think that this view is compatible with what we call liberal education, according to what you are defining it?
Well, I think I look upon negative freedom as an instrumental good, not as a final good. In other words, a person needs a certain level of autonomy and ability to act on his own, according to his own mind and his own will, in order to achieve anything good. You can't force people, for instance, to be virtuous through threats and through coercion. Neither can you force people to learn through threats or coercion. So to a certain degree, that kind of freedom is always going to be present as a necessary means. But it's not the end of liberal education, I would think, is not that. It's not, except insofar as you might say that the end of liberal education is in part is the ability to know how to use such freedom well. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Now, if you're okay so far, it's time for John Breen. He recently graduated from Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And I'm wondering, John, do you think you got a liberal education?
I would say yes. I didn't start off with Holy Apostles. I started at a little school in Canada on campus there, and that's where I had my first introduction to liberal arts. It was basically being exposed to what I thought was everything, theology, philosophy, history, literature, science, music, things like that. So I was college age and I was wanting to learn, but I wasn't sure what to major in. So I thought liberal arts was the safest course of action until I found the line of career that I wanted to get into. And as the years went on, I was more interested in theology, so I eventually got my bachelor's in theology.
But you would say you did have a liberal education.
Yeah, I would say that.
And would you
how much
say,
I retained of it would be another thing.
And would you say that you recognize in yourself now a real freedom that is the result of that education?
Absolutely. I'm a lot more knowledgeable about Western civilization, even our own history, more so than I was going into it. The whole purpose with liberal arts, as our guest recently just said, that it's freeing a person. Liberal arts, it frees person. What does it free them from? It frees them from ignorance.
All right, let me do a little devil's advocacy here, and all three of you can join in. There's a famous philosopher, Isaiah Berlin, and he has a famous essay, Two Concepts of Liberty, and he makes this distinction, too, that Christopher Zehnder made between positive freedom and negative freedom. And he says, all things considered, especially from a historical perspective, we ought to be more interested in negative freedom, because people who have been overly interested in positive freedom want us to organize our lives around some end, which they take to be the proper end, but which we might not take to be the proper end. And whatever is the proper end is properly a matter of debate. And what we ought to do is just to make sure that people have negative freedom, and then let them make the choices that they will. And this perhaps takes us back, at least in the neighborhood, of Mario's discussion of libertarianism in relation to liberal education. And of course, the bad guy in all of this is, at the beginning of the story, is Plato, because Plato had something that he wanted to educate everybody for. And what happens is that in the Platonic view of things, education becomes more and more restrictive in practice, more and more structured, more and more demanding, all towards some end, which ultimately it seems will make us free. But, well, Karl Popper said that Plato was one of the original totalitarians, and it came through in his educational scheme.
So now I'll take a punch at that. When we talk about ends, right, for any creature, we're talking about natures, and we're assuming something about what the nature of that thing is, what its essence is, what its fundamental character is, and I would say, I forget, the name of the philosopher was Isaiah what? I'm sorry.
Isaiah Berlin.
Isaiah Berlin. He's also assuming a certain end of what a man is, basically. And he is proposing that society has to be ordered according to that end. And basically his assumption is, of course, is that we can never agree on ends, the end of human life. But there's still a kind of assumption as to how human beings are essentially a creature which is incapable of achieving those, attaining the answer to those questions, and therefore we have to order society based on it. So there's going to be some restrictions even there as to what kind of expression is going to be allowed. And I think you see that that even in any kind of regime, no matter how much it claims to be based on libertarian principles, there are certain restrictions placed on even just how what kind of ideas even can be expressed. Now, oftentimes, like the United States, we allow a great variety of expression of ideas, but mostly because we don't find those ideas threatening. But in times when certain ideas were considered threatening, such as when communism was considered a real threat, look at the Red Scare and those, particularly in the late teens and early 20s of the last century, there were restrictions upon what one could say and what one could teach. And that's because of an underlying assumption as to what society should be based upon, I think, an implicit assumption on what man's nature actually is.
Okay, let me.
May I?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Please, yes, do go ahead. And by the way, BTW, as they say, I suspect one of you worthies is typing in the background, or it could be that I hear the wheels turning in somebody's head. But if it's not wheels turning into somebody's head, if it's somebody typing or rustling papers, our gentle auditors will be wondering.
I just have a follow-up question for Christopher. You are saying that there is an assumption, implicit assumption in Isaiah Berlin views or in any other view about what man is before making a notion of freedom. Mm-hmm. So what would be then in our contemporary landscape the starting point? Because precisely that is the issue, because we don't agree that starting point. It seems we are reducing the public square to cease for power. Because imagine that you are setting the preamble of any constitution and you are during a constitutional convention. So there is no prevalent or hegemonic view of human nature. The traditional human nature view of the West is completely gone, even to the point that many people who are educated, quote unquote, in liberal arts have been absorbing postmodern views in their classes of literature, history, and philosophy. So there is no prevalent view. So what would be then how then we manage the starting point where there is no commonality, there is no, common tradition anymore?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question, and I think there's two things perhaps we're discussing here, and one is liberal education, which can be discussed on the level of a particular institution, right? So what I might propose, say, for the Constitution, say, of a Catholic college, is not necessarily is not what I would propose for the Constitution of a current state, right? When there has to be, I think, a certain level of agreement on the societal level as to what the good for man is before we can actually enshrine that in an instrument of government. So at this point, I mean, I would not be in favor of trying to enforce a confessional state upon any particular regime that I know of, any that I could think of. What we have to do, our task, I would say at this point, is a kind of evangelization, or maybe what is called a pre-evangelization, as the theology used to talk about before the council, namely that we try to prepare through rational argument, through culture and the like, we try to draw people into a proper understanding of the nature of man. And only when we can't really think about the constitutional level, embodying that in the Constitution or in the regime, until such a time as there's a kind of mass conversion. Such a thing was possible in most of the Middle Ages because there was a general consensus. There is no general consensus, so now we have to work as best we can within the structures that have been given us. And it's going to, for that very reason, be a highly imperfect kind of result we're going to get. But that's but we have to work with what we have. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Let's apply this discussion that we're having, and especially since Christopher is saying it's not directing itself, he's not directing us towards, nor should we be directed towards the constitution of a given country. Let's keep it focused on education, and let's keep it really focused. How about homeschooling? Does homeschooling, which takes many forms, does homeschooling tend to be the structuring of a curriculum with a very particular end in mind, such that, the Board of Education for the state of California, the Department of Education for the state of California, would be rightly concerned that homeschooling would narrow the horizons of many of its students? An extreme example of this, of course, is the whole question of the Amish. A very clear idea of what to be done, where the Amish are going. They have a very clear idea of that. They have an education system that they think meets their needs very well. And ordinarily what states say, where Amish people are, yeah, you can do all of that so long as you also do what we mandate you to do. And if you don't do what we mandate you to do, you can't do what you want to do. And the same thing happens with yeshiva education, with very Orthodox Jews. You want to do this, that's fine, but you also have to meet these state-imposed standards. Now that's an example of education ordered to shared communal end in the context of a supposedly liberal state and the tension that develops between the two. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that point of contention?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a problem with a homeschooler who wants to educate their children liberally, as opposed to, and as you know, that homeschoolers are very varied. Some homeschoolers have a very utilitarian view of education and educate in that fashion. The thing is that liberal education does not exclude any of the disciplines. In fact, by necessity, it includes them all. So there can't be homeschooling families going to educate their children in a liberal fashion is going to include mathematics. It's going to include literature, language. In fact, it should include more than what you actually get in the typical schools. So it's more a matter of why you're doing it, and which is also going to obviously influence how you do it. But the how you do it doesn't effectively undermine the way, the purposes of the greater society and what they think education is. It enhances it and it takes it further. So I don't think there should be. I mean, we've homeschooled now for 30 years, and we've never had a problem with that. And our kids, I think, get a good education. I know this is true of a lot of homeschoolers who have the ideal of liberal education. Their kids actually come ahead of students who don't have that kind of education. And I think it's partly because we don't truncate education. When you have a purely utilitarian view of education, you're going to tend to only study math as if it were useful for engineering. When you have a liberal education goal, that's going to be included because you have to have all the arithmetic and everything else. But you're also going to look at it in a more speculative fashion, which I think is more inclusive than otherwise.
Another case in point particular, John Breen, could you have had the theology courses that you did take? Could you have taken those courses at a state university? Would they have been offered?
I don't think so. Especially the theology ones that I was taking. I don't think the state would have been capable of teaching theology of the body at all, since it's as secular as it is. But especially given now that they have a perverted sense of morality. I don't think I would have gotten the same thing out of a secular school. Absolutely not.
Which in a way takes us back to the unmentioned but very much operative agenda regarding the end in view of education. There is a view that most secularists have about the end of education, and that it's a view that they build into the curriculum, and it's a curriculum that excludes, for example, theology. It excludes in practice a good deal of philosophy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's so important that we talk about questions like this because when we talk about them, we're talking about, aren't we, Christopher, what you call common goods.
Right.
Could you tell us a bit about common goods?
Well, there's the common good, which includes a number of common goods. I define the common good essentially as that good, which is the fundamental human good. It's a good that belongs to me and to you, regardless of our status in society, regardless of our profession, regardless of our sex. It's that good that makes us fundamentally fully human. And so it has application. It extends itself from basic material goods like access to food and water, shelter, up through culture and education, up finally ultimately to the vision of God, from being a Catholic, the Catholic perspective here. The vision of God, which is the ultimate, the final common good. That's the common good which embraces all these other goods. Now, it's good insofar as it's the integral human good. It's also the common good because we only actually achieve it in common with other people. We really can't imagine achieving, just on the natural level, the heights of culture and education without an organized society, people working together, organized. So the common good has both those aspects. It's the integral human good, and it's the integral human good which is realized by life in society. So education, especially if it's ordered to wisdom, as what I'm suggesting, is one of the higher of the common goods, because it's a good which, unlike say even the access to food, is never diminished by the more people sharing it. And that's one of the hard things about the common goods, which are more material. There's always tends to be with any particular time a certain limit to how many people can access them. But with wisdom, there's never a limit to how many people access them. If I share my hamburger with you, which is, my hamburger is actually a private good in this case, it diminishes every time I divide it, right? And we all get less. If, however, I share something I've learned with somebody, teach them, it never diminishes. In fact, it increases both for the student, and it also serves the teacher, because the more I teach it, the deeper I understand it. So those common goods, when we get to the more spiritual or the intellectual common goods, the cultural common goods, they are most properly the common good. And those, of course, those are the goods which education as such is ordered.
It's sometimes said, and I'm going to make a shift here, a very calculated way, from education to politics. It's sometimes said that politics has to do with that which we have to do together. Mm. And with every sphere of life, there are virtues that have a special connection. St. Thomas Aquinas, the common doctor, speaks of civic friendship. I wonder if in our debates about immigration, what we need to do more of is think about civic friendship as a common good, and how the development of civic friendship doesn't mean that we have to lose something. Civic friendship is in fact enriched as we draw others into civic friendship. Is that a legitimate connection? Education as a common good, the political sphere, civic friendship as an area for common good?
Well, civic friendship, I think, is the basis of our life together because of the common good. It's, in fact, what's interesting is that with the common goods, I should want other people to share in them. And the simple reason is, if I love the common good, I love it not simply as the good, but as common. And so as common, it can't simply, I have to realize it can't simply be for me. It has to be for every other person I meet, to the degree they can, of course, they can participate in it. So, yeah, I mean, that's friendship, is wishing the good for the other person. And I think that's really the civic friendship is really at the center of that. And that the same thing would extend to the state. I mean, I think when you're talking about immigration, there's certain things that have to be kept in mind, like if there's too much immigration, it's possible, I'm not saying it's the case in the United States right now, but it's possible that there could be a diminishment of, say, certain material goods, which one has to take into consideration. Too great a competition for jobs, a lowering of wages, that type of thing. That could happen, I imagine. So we have to keep those goods of the particular state in mind. But at the same time, we have to look upon our good that we possess within a particular nation as, in some way, having a social mortgage, as having contributing to the common good of all. And to the degree that we can use those goods for the common good of all, even people in other nations, is incumbent upon us to use those goods in that way.
Now, you introduced this notion of the destination of goods. Mm-hmm. Suppose we talk about the land that constitutes the United States of America. Is that, in a sense, something that is owned by the citizens of the United States of America? And if it's owned by the citizens of the United States of America, is it an absolute ownership? Or is it rather that the land is something that the citizens of the United States have stewardship over, but they ought to so use that land as to keep always in mind what's called the universal destination of goods. The land ultimately isn't something that citizens own absolutely, but something that citizens are stewards over with a view to the common good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stewardship is a very good term to use in this connection, properly understood. I think it's right to say that the land of the United States, the land, say, the state of Ohio, serves the good primarily and first of the people who live in Ohio. And one would hope that the regions of the world are so divided that each state or each regime or each country could have its land could serve the good of the people living within it. But there is always an aspect where there's an ordination to something beyond the mere citizens. And that always has to be taken into consideration because God gave the entire world to all of humanity. He didn't actually give, this might offend some of my Buckeye neighbors, he didn't give the state of Ohio just to the people of Ohio. In fact, he really had nothing to do with the division of the boundaries, except in a providential way. So that always has to be kept in mind, that when other people need, even if they're outside our country, we have a certain duty to fulfill that need with the goods that we have. We can't simply hoard them to ourselves. So I think we have to steward them properly. We have to understand that these goods that we have here in the state of Ohio are meant first and foremost to serve the good of the citizens of Ohio. But beyond that, we have to use those goods.
Now I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I want to do a pivot now. You've been talking about Ohio, and I'm not going to forget to ask you why you ever moved to Ohio. But before I get to that, suppose we compare and contrast. We got a bunch of teachers here, and even our youngest member, John, has been doing some teaching last year. Teachers like to say compare and contrast. What would you say if you compare Ohio with Venezuela? Mario, you have a special background with regard to Venezuela, a special knowledgeability about it. Christopher has just told us what the land of Ohio is all about, or in its most important aspects, what it's for. Compare and contrast Ohio with Venezuela.
Well, it's a very challenging question because I cannot separate myself from observing what is happening in Venezuela right now. And so, but I think it's happening in general terms all across Latin America, which is that the claim that we made before that there is an homogeneous view of the culture is at this point gone in Latin America. By that, I mean that we assume always that Latin America has a very permanent Catholic view of what property ought to be. We should be a steward of the land and so on. But right now, that view perhaps is not even in the majority of people. So in that sense, I believe that there is a fragmentation of views about almost everything. On the top of that, there is an oppression, a political situation. We need not to get into that. But my point is that to what extent we see some similarities today in people in different parts of the world, so to speak, regarding what is real, what is reality is all about. And what I see is that it's prevalent today, the assumption that reality is what I feel like it is. So in that sense, I think through the social media, we are reached to a point that there is no starting point. And so in that you see clearly in Venezuela, particularly now that the opposition has no unifying message because there is no unifying view of reality. And so I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying, but I don't see that there is much difference today, other than economic development and so that. But culturally, if this country is fragmented, as I think it is, the same thing happened with Latin America. So at the core of that, at the deepest problem of that is, what is reality all about?
Well, then, you know where this leads. In a context of fragmentation, in a context of deep disagreement about our ends, our proper ends, both our institutional ends and our ends as human persons, what can we hope for in terms of solidarity? And more specifically, the open door for some time now is try to explore prospects of the American Solidarity Party, which really draws an inspiration from Christian democracy of Europe, Christian democracy of South America, and of course, more recently, the Solidarity movement in Poland. Suppose somebody comes to the conclusions that we've been coming to today, and we've come to before on other panels that we've had, that there's a flight from unity, that there's a fragmentation, and then suppose somebody says we ought to do something about that, and then somebody says, Well, we have to do it together. We can't do it effectively one by one. And then suppose somebody has the bright idea of a political party. And suppose somebody says, let's call it the American, since we're here, the American Solidarity Party. What can such a party do? And I'm going to direct that to Christopher, because I know he has ideas about the direction that the American Solidarity Party should be taking.
Well, yeah, in terms of the party itself, or any party, I think what it has to have an integral, robust view of what human nature is, the nature of human society, and be bold in expressing those ideas. Not to immerse itself in the prevalent political thought which is divided between left and right and center, but transcend that with a robust view of the common good and present that view of the common good to the people at large, to the people we're speaking to. Now, I understand that some people in the party think that that's a losing thing, because how are we going to win political office doing that? And I guess my notion is that based on kind of the historical reality of third parties, is that third parties actually present ideas. They rarely win any kind of political power. And so, and it's those ideas which have to catch on. And a political party is a way of expressing those ideas. So I think we have to rise above the political divisions that we have and look to an integral notion of the common good based upon an understanding of what man is and what human society is, and present that. So that's more on the theoretical view, what we say. In terms of what we do, we can actually join in with a number of good causes without necessarily tying ourselves to them. Obviously, things like the pro-life movement, but the anti-war movement. I mean, many of the people who are going to be involved in any kind of anti-war movement are in profound disagreement with us on a number of different issues. But it doesn't stop us from actually joining with them, and for very narrow purposes. I think here in Ohio, there are groups that are looking for farmland preservation because we have a real problem with sprawl development here. That's something, too, that members of the party or the party itself can espouse without aligning itself with broader political coalitions. To show that, and that could be those are the avenues by which we can show people how those ideas fit in with other ideas, the complex of ideas that include farmland preservation, include right to life, include opposition to unjust wars, include all sorts of other causes, labor issues and the like, economic justice. And I think that's the direction the party should take. And I hope that's specific enough, if that makes sense.
Well, it sure makes sense, and we can make it even more specific, because I'm going to ask John Breen, who says it's a nice day in Joliet, Illinois, what the American Solidarity Party might do in his neck of the woods that would make itself known. Yes, these people are connected with something called solidarity, and connect with local issues that lots of different people from different perspectives have come to be engaged with. How can the party function where you are, John?
That's a hard question to answer. I think ultimately it requires a change of heart before we can expect a change in policy, especially given the political climate here in Illinois, that it's very liberal, very democratic, and basically a Chicago that dominates our politics. So, which is kind of a sad reality. As far as the American Solidarity Party, I think it would take more of an evangelization effort on their part to win over the state of Illinois. But who knows?
May I add something there? I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I think that's right. But at the same time, we can do limited good in even our political regime. I'm thinking, for instance, of certain movements like maybe, I don't know, people disagree on this, but, raising the minimum wage, or certain environmental issues which we can espouse, if there are ballot propositions, if there are laws before the state assembly and the like, laws before the federal government. We could work for the passage of those good laws, limited though they be, in order to achieve a modicum of good, because I really think it's very important. Oftentimes what we're talking about is the integrity of not just human beings, but the integrity of families. And so, for instance, like wage issues or economic justice issues are very important in maintaining an integral family life. And if we can promote particular issues in a very active way, even if the whole complex of the law and of the state is not on our side, we can still achieve that kind of limited good. So yeah, the evangelization part is good, get the ideas out, but also engage in those particular issues. And, run candidates in local office. I'm obviously running for president, but don't have any great hopes on that, of winning. But yeah, promote those things, promote the good, wherever we can find it.
And I would definitely agree that a startup in local politics too, like working from the ground up is the right direction for the American Solidarity Party to move.
Well, let's see. Does any of this connect with the move to Ohio on the part of the Zehnder family?
Okay, what do you want to know about it?
Well,
why was it Ohio?
Was it wholly personal, or was it personal with a view to the common good, connecting with people that might be open to the ideas that you've presented us? Did you get pushed around because of the economy, or did you direct yourself to Ohio to connect with family roots and the possibility of developing in a more organic way than one might in California?
Well, we lived in a rather nice community, Tehachapi,
yes,
in there. And for a long time, I was thinking I wanted to live and die there. And we had 5 acres, we had fruit trees, the little kind of quasi half-assed farm. But
it's called a hobby farm.
Yeah. Well, that's dignifying it too much. Oh. But anyway.
A realist. He's always a realist. No matter where he lives, he's a realist.
What we did it for familial reasons. First of all, our children were starting to go to school in the East, and we realized they were not coming back to California because just primarily the cost of living. And so we thought if we're going to be part of our children's lives in the future, we should probably live closer to them. So we were looking someplace east of the Mississippi. The reason why we chose, part of it too was liturgical. Our liturgical options were sort of, nosebleed high church. So our liturgical options were getting fewer and fewer. We actually had a choir in the local parish, but it wasn't working. And so we were looking for a place where we could have a good liturgical life, and a place where, we'd be close to our children. Now, where that would have been, we had no idea. And that's I work from home and I could move anywhere. So that's a very difficult choice to make. And so we hesitated for a long time. The reason why we chose Ohio, part of it is my family, the Zehnder's and my mother's family, the Andregs, are from this area. They're from Michigan and Ohio. So that there's some familial roots there. But one of the chief reasons we did it was because I spoke at a conference from the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education in Philadelphia, and Tom Stork, who many of you might know, the great expert on distributism and Catholic social teaching, lives here in Westerville, Ohio, right outside of Columbus. And he said, I think he was trying to get us to decide to move to Ohio. So he said, why don't you come visit? Since you're in Philadelphia, you can fly to Columbus. So we did, and we liked Columbus. We liked the Ohio area. It had many of the things we were looking for. We had a choice in terms of liturgical life, and so I guess you might say personal familial reasons, and some connection to that, to our past, my family's past at least, drew us to Ohio. In terms of working for the common good, well, I think you can do that anywhere. We could have moved to Alabama, I suppose, and done it there as well. But the reason why we chose Ohio over the other is a certain congeniality, you might say, towards what we saw was necessary for a family life.
There's certainly elements of cult and culture. I think of Peter Moore and culture and cultivation. I suppose you left a certain cultivation, but you had a wider cult and culture opportunity in Ohio. And that leads me to a question I cannot omit. You write novels. In the midst of all of this, you're writing novels. How does that fit in?
I don't know. I mean, why did I decide to write?
What kind of candor is this? Uncommon candor. Now, this is not an escapist thing. This is not an art for art's sake thing. You write these novels. You write more than one of them. They're not set in a contemporary context. What's going on with those novels?
Well, you want me to talk about what the novels are about, or why I wrote them?
Well, a little of both.
Okay. Well, as you know, I'm a convert from Lutheranism. Missouri Synod Lutheranism. Missouri Synod was actually, my family has deep roots in Missouri Synod. We were one of the founders. My family's probably been Lutheran since the Reformation of Nuremberg in 1525. So we have deep roots there. So I've always had that kind of drawn fascination to those things. So I had thought for a long time of writing something about the Reformation period in Germany. Yeah, partly a few people write about it. They always write about England, but they don't write about Germany. And I sort of understand that. But German Reformation is very interesting, and it's very important. And in part, I guess, on a non-literary level or a non-storytelling level, the German Reformation is really made us what we are in the West in many ways. So to understand that from its roots and its beginnings, I think is an important thing. But I didn't write the books primarily because I wanted to express ideas, though I do want to express ideas in the books. I wanted to write a good story. I wanted to write a story. And I guess, why does any novelist write a novel? I think they just want to write a novel. They want to create something which they think is beautiful. They try to create a work of beauty. And that should be the primary goal of writing any kind of literary work. You have to first be in love with the story and in telling the story, and in telling that story in the best way you possibly can, in the most beautiful fashion you can, the most evocative fashion. And that's what really moves me when I'm writing. And so, I guess that's what, when I knew this question was going to come up, I said, well, why did I start writing these novels? And I had to say, I don't know why I started to write them on one level. Just like I don't know why sometimes the plot takes the turn it does take. It just occurs to me that this is a good turn for the plot to take, and it takes that turn, and it sort of develops from there. I have a basic idea where it's going, but not any real specific idea of ends it's going to pass through, or the means it's going to pass through in order to achieve it. So,
well, that gives us a good context, and I want to ask Mario. Christopher, in part, is writing to connect with a specific cultural heritage. And I think it's a cultural heritage that's fairly accessible to a range of Americans, certainly German Americans. Now, I guess I'm on this compare and contrast thing. I think a great many Americans are not at all aware of the culture of, is this right, La Hispanidad? And is there any kind of literature today that's drawing on the profound cultural heritage of Spain as it developed in the Americas? Is there any kind of literature of that sort that you might recommend to us?
It's a good question. If anyone want to know something, at least perspective, which is quite accurate, I think, about Latin American culture, defined in broader terms, because when we talk about Latin American culture, we need to be very, very careful, because one thing is northern Mexico, another thing is Argentina or Bolivia. But there are some some connection. There's no question about that. But if anyone want to know a little bit about that spirit, if you will, I think The Labyrinth of Solitude of the Octavio Paz, the Nobel Prize winner in literature, a Mexican, which he described or portrayed. What is the Latin American spirit all about? You will find there a narrative about the need for strong men, the root in Baroque Counter-Reformation culture, the influence of caudillos, and that idea have permeated Latin American way of doing things, even as we speak. There are some changes over time. There's no question about that. But I think that book is key. And another book that I use in my classes, which is, I think, is earlier, I think it's more scholarly done, was written by a well-known, at least for some specialists, Latin American philosopher, Leopoldo Zea, Z-E-A, and the title is The Latin American Mind. It seems that it's a philosophical book, but it's not as much that you expect it is, but describes precisely what is the mindset behind Latin America? What are the tradition of culture that are intertwined in this idea that we talk about Latin America? And he started with the idea, and I'm going to end with this, that Latin American is what he called, repeating another author, he called cosmic race. Race not in the biological sense, or cosmic culture, which is an intertwined in many traditions there. And I think these two books, which you can find in English, is a good start.
So Paz and Zea.
Yes.
Those are the names.
Yes.
All right. Now, I just want to ask Christopher one more question. Can you give us a couple of titles of your novels, and how could we purchase them?
Well, both of them are called a song for Elsa, and his last name, the name is E-L-S-E, so German pronounced. So it looks like Else, right? Song for Else, but the first part is called The Vow, second part is called The Overthrow, and you can find them on Amazon easily.
All right, very good. And we, even though we're more than halfway through summer, we can add to our summer reading list. We've got a bunch of good suggestions.
There are a lot of cold scenes of winter there too. It can work for fall and winter as well.
A book for all seasons.
That's exactly right.
Let's close as we always do in prayer, and as we usually do, with the gospel from today's liturgy. Friday the 9th is the day that we're doing this podcast. This is from the gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit could there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come in his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay each according to his conduct. Amen, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Gospel of the Lord. Thanks to all of you. We'll be back. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.